we're going to have a conversation today about an idea that popped up on one of Scott Howell's Iron Sights podcasts After Dark episodes. And I have failed in that I forgot to pull up who it was he was talking to. But one of my biggest bones over the last 5 years has been all the de-escalation training that's popped up. I evaluate training for a national organization, and there's a lot of great training, but there's also a lot of trash training that comes through. And because it meets certain technicalities, it is approved. The content isn't necessarily bad. The design isn't really measured, but overwhelmingly in every single de-escalation course I've evaluated, it's results based. They train people that if you do this, then people will do that. And then there's scenarios, if there is a scenario, and I'm going to say right now, every de-escalation training absolutely 100% should
Come
involve
on.
scenarios, assessments. If
I'm
there
having technical difficulties, fellas.
if there is any scenario-based assessments, it's all if you do the thing, then you've done it right, which is not how it goes. So I got really passionate about this years ago. A buddy of mine um,
Thanks.
answered a call. He went to a suicidal subject. This guy has years of critical incident training, years of de-escalation negotiations training, even has a master's in counseling.
Good.
So he responded to this suicidal subject call, and for an hour and a half, he talked to the guy, talked him down. The guy was sitting on his porch with a firearm in his hand, and he listened, communicated, built rapport, did everything he was supposed to do. After an hour and a half, the guy said, I'm really grateful for all the time you've spent in talking to me, lifted the gun up and shot himself in the head. By all standards, currently all standards, my friend failed. Based on all the de-escalation training out there, he failed because the guy ended up shooting himself. Because de-escalation training has been designed for results, not on performance. If they had measured his performance, he had done stellar. The problem is that a lot of our training, overwhelmingly a lot of our training, including de-escalation training, is based on if you do this thing correctly, then you will get the results you want. And we all know that that is not how it happens. The people we're talking to are not input-output machines. They get a say in what happens on a call. They get to, exactly, the other guy gets a say in how it goes. The other guy gets a vote. That's a common terminology. The problem is that the escalation training that we have is if you do this thing, then you will have this result. And I honestly believe that a lot of the problems that we see in de-escalation training in our industry right now is based on several factors. One, it's results oriented. So A plus B equals the result you want. Two, it's randomly thrown into training somewhere without any kind of relationship to anything else. And three, it's poorly designed. It's just poorly designed. So that's what this call is about today. Is I had this epiphany in listening to the to this to the, I'm gonna find out which one it is while the other two gentlemen speak. But it dawned on me that de-escalation training absolutely has to be part of the use of force training and should be part of combatives training, and that it has to be done in a specific order, and it has to be done in league with these two things, because the problem that we have, if you haven't seen that post, what do catfishers and call center salespeople and cops all have in common? We have to convince people to do something that they don't want to do. Who does it best? Catfishers. Salesmen do it second best. Cops don't do it as well because they're not trained to recognize the thing that makes the other two successful. It's not that they're able to convince people, it's because they're able to know when they're not going to convince someone and move on. We don't train our de-escalation the way it's siloed, is we're not training people how to embrace all the other things that are involved in de-escalation. As Jamie likes to say, as he's heard also, shooting somebody in the face is de-escalation. Going hands-on is de-escalation. We need to train people on how to adapt that. So I want to go so far as to say that we shouldn't use the term use of force anymore, we should use the term use of de-escalation. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So that's a real quick intro. Bill, are you with us now? 100%?
Yeah, I'm good now.
Oh boy.
Awesome. Very good. I covered for you, man. I did all the talking.
That's what you're here for, buddy.
So, Bill has done a deep dive in how de escalation training is treated by multiple organizations and multiple states. So, Bill, you want to talk to that? And then Jamie's going to also talk about the certifications, his experiences having been SWAT for 16 years, and what de escalation really looks like, as well as the problems that he has seen with de escalation out on the street. So, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, so essentially, what started all of this with the de-escalation stuff was I'm teaching use of force and DT and all that fun stuff. Um, and training with Craig Douglas for a while. I really like his material. It's very good. And one of the things that he covers is a block of instruction called managing unknown contacts. And he's the first person and probably the only person that I know that teaches cops and civilians like the initial phases of approaching somebody you don't know and how you interact with them before you're even applying force or anything like that, like a precursor to force. So I've done this training with him, for I don't know, since 2015. I usually train with him once a year. And he has a very specific way that he does this. And it involves like training and identifying pre-assault indicators, um, pre pre-flight indicators, reading body language, determining intent, what the person intentions are based off their body language, stuff like that. And after doing that block, I started to realize like this is like what de-escalation should be starting as, right? Us like in the observation phase and the dialogue that we have before something happens, right? And what I started to notice was that that is not the case for a majority of them, because granted, um, you show up to a call that's chaotic, right? Or there's action already occurring. That might not be your first move, but more often than not, at some point, you're going to go up to somebody and say, like, hey, what's going on? Why are we here? What's the issue, right? And so that block of instruction covered that. So then I go back to the goals and objectives from various different agencies regarding de-escalation, even the definition of it. And every organization that I found, the ones in my state specifically, had a different definition, which I thought was interesting. And the one that Post recognizes is it defines de-escalation as using strategies and techniques to decrease the intensity of conflict or potentially volatile situation. So that's the definition that Post has. Well, there's a couple of legal groups that Post consults, and those organizations also have different definitions. So it got me thinking, and it got me talking to you, Rick, about if there's different definitions across the board, then by design, the goals and objectives for those courses under different people would need to be different. And I started to look into it and saw that that was the case, essentially. And with the goals and objectives that Post mandates, they're not congruent with what we're seeing in scenario based training, performance evaluations, and like in real life on the street. So then that led me down to the rabbit hole for use of force and getting that program dialed in. And there's a big gap in the use of force. It's like, what's the precursor, like we spoke about earlier? How did we get here? And if we're mandated to attempt to de-escalate when feasible, why is that not part of this curriculum? And why are we trying to de-escalate? Why do we see cops de-escalating at the wrong time? And I think that's why your analogy is so good, because de-escalation is great, but it takes two people, a willing participant. And when it doesn't work, we have to understand what to go to next. And for the jujitsu nerds, if there's any in the chat, that would be similar to me saying, like, all right, I'm going to try this arm bar on you, and I'm pulling on your arm for 3 minutes. and I'm getting exhausted and it's not working, I'm foolish to think that if I stay here another 3 minutes that it's going to work. Like I need to do something else. And
Definition of
cops,
insanity.
it really is. And we see this time and time again on body cameras, on the news, YouTube is cops try, they chase the car, they pit it, the cars crash, they run up to the car, and then they start giving verbal commands. Like, why are we putting ourselves in these positions that are dangerous and then attempting to use verbal strategies to diffuse it? Like, it's cops are putting themselves at risk unnecessarily in attempts to appease the legislatures and the bosses. Like, look, I tried to de-escalate. You did, but you almost got killed. And on top of that, um, just because you're supposed to de-escalate, like a lot of the times they're talking that they're excuse me, they're covering themselves and saying, "Oh, when feasible or um, when it's appropriate," But all the bosses and a lot of the people do not want that smoke of skipping that step, or if they can solve it through that, they want to look like the person that's, oh, we're doing the right thing. But it's really creating a culture where we're we're unintentionally putting cops at risk by expecting this from them at the
Yeah.
most inopportune time.
And let's be 100% clear here. The de-escalation that's been foisted upon us is 100% political. It's politicians forced it on law enforcement, or law enforcement agencies rushed to include it in order to not be judged by politicians. It was 100% a political thing. We had de-escalation training prior to 2020, but it was reserved for negotiators or critical
Mm.
incident
Or it was taught
responders.
as verbal judo,
Yeah,
Yeah,
right?
that's right. Yeah.
We would teach that, hey, how do you talk people down? And that's a normal thing in law enforcement. And we do that
yeah,
all the time on every call we go on. So, how did de-escalation become this buzzword that we have to do that? And that's the only way to resolve a situation.
yeah,
And the problem became when de-escalation became the only way you can de-escalate is through verbal means.
yeah.
And we
And
take the idea that the bad guy always has a say. We
Yeah.
can talk him down all we want, but the bad guy always has an opportunity to do something different, no matter how hard we try to talk him off, whatever he's going to do.
absolutely. And one of the things I noticed in all the courses that I evaluated, um, all the courses that I saw, a few of them came from actual law enforcement personnel. Most of them came from people outside of law enforcement who were like psychologists or salespeople, and they were all throwing in because they thought they saw a gravy train of de-escalation training. And some of them are like 4-hour courses with a 10-question quiz. How are you training anybody to de-escalate with a 10-question, poorly written
Mhm.
multiple choice quiz?
Yeah.
The other thing that we talked about this last night, Perf's ICAT. I read the methodology on it, and while it's the only one that really did a deep dive on law enforcement actions, they didn't base it off of actual performance. It was based off surveys, based on past incidents, based on videos that were captured, that kind of stuff. And it came down to, and their training, while it's one of the most common one in the United States, the most commonly trained, it still comes down to if you do this thing, then people will respond the way you want to. This isn't how to make people like you and get dates. It's There's been no training that I've seen, and if I'm wrong, I would love to find out who's got this training. I want to see somebody who's actually done a performance task analysis, that's gone out, sat with cops and watched them and realized that the problem isn't the de-escalation. The problem is recognizing when talking stops.
Yeah.
This is something I did for a travel company. In a sales, they wanted to improve the quality of sales. And I said, the problem isn't what people are saying to people. The number one salespeople know when to cut bait and move on. They're making more phone calls because they know talking's not going to work, so I'm going to move on. But we're not training cops to recognize when talking is done, and they need to move on to a different tactic.
And you bring up Perf. Several years ago, we had Perf come into our agency and teach us this ICAT stuff, and I had to become one of the instructors for the department for ICAT. And it was interesting during that training. It was fed down our throats, hey, talking is the only way to de-escalate a situation. And they would show us video after video of officers de-escalating a situation by talking. And the bad guy would give up, the suspect would give up, or the suspect would put down the knife or whatever, and it worked out great. And then they would show us a very similar call where the officers would try to talk to the person, but then they would get rushed with a knife. And so now the officers have to use force. Well, the only thing that changed in those situations was the actions of the suspect. It
Mhm.
had nothing to do with what the officers were doing right or wrong. The suspects now had the opportunity to choose, okay, now's my time. I'm going to take it. I'm going to charge the officers. I'm going to end my life. I'm going to do whatever. And a big part of it too is some of the videos that they would show and the training that they did, they were totally ignoring the fact that officers, like Bill said, were putting themselves in a bad position tactically. So now their decision making has to be bad from the front end. How about we teach officers how to make a better decision tactically on the front end so their decision making is better on the back end? So they give
Mhm.
themselves some time, space, and distance to make a good decision so that they can have a conversation. That way, their decision making to use whatever level of force is necessary isn't rushed when it has to be.
Yeah, exactly. And part of that training is that, like, I know a lot of, I've talked to a lot of academies in the last year or so. And a lot of the academies do this plug and play, where if they have a gap, then, oh, let's put this in here. If they have a gap
Mhm.
there, let's put this
Yep.
in there. And sometimes, they can't control it because it's like, well, we don't have access to the range, so we have to rearrange the schedule. The problem is by leaving de-escalation a block, there's no connection between the person's not responding to my commands. Now I need to go hands on. They have block of de-escalation, then 2 or 3 weeks, and then we talk about fighting. Then they have 2 or 3 weeks, then we have block on use of force, 2 or 3 weeks. Now we're going to drive a lot real fast. Now we're going to shoot. Now we're going to go back to combatives. There's no interleaving. So my contention is that de-escalation should not be its own block. It should be a part of both the use of force training and the combatives at the same time. That way you can start interleaving and establishing those kind of things. But one of the questions I would have is which should come first? The de-escalation part in use of force, or de-escalation as a part of combatives? Because they're not taught side by side. They're taught use of force down the road, and then they get combatives a couple weeks later. Then they get firearms a couple weeks later, or they get firearms first. There's all these different things. There's no chance to interleave and say, okay, now that we've gone through and had scenarios where you didn't know what to do when de-escalation failed, now we're going to talk about what you can do when de-escalation fails. And these are the 9 tactics that you've been talking a lot about lately, Jamie. The 9 things you can use to affect control. And if that doesn't work, then we can go to less lethal. If that doesn't work, then we can go to, the more lethal.
And each parts of those, whether you're going control holds or using a taser or a beanbag, a 40 millimeter, or even your handgun, is a form of de-escalating the situation to
Mhm.
get the
Exactly.
person to stop doing what they're doing.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I've been advocating for changing it from use of force to use of de-escalation, because if we've all abandoned the use of force continuum concept. But if you think about it, the first thing we have to do is we have to announce our presence, start de-escalation. But if somebody's running at me with a knife, as soon as I get out of the car, I don't need to try to talk them down first. I can immediately
Mhm.
move to my lethal threat, my lethal response, but they're not building on those. They get a scenario where you're immediately attacked, go to firearms. Then they get a separate scenario where you have to talk somebody down, and they're told if they do a good job, then comply. But we need them to do a good job with somebody who doesn't comply, and the role player escalates, even though the cop is trying to de-escalate.
Well, that kind of brings up a really good point. So, what I was talking about earlier, the definitions, I think it's really important because the definitions of what different organizations are considering really determines like what you're actually supposed to do because it's so ambiguous. And the best one that I found was force science, obviously, right? And it's funny how no one adopted Force Science's definitions and guidance verbatim because it's the best one that I've seen. And it goes right into what Jamie was talking about. So before I read the definitions, force science refers to de-escalation of having the four C's, right? And it's containment, control, contact, then communication. And see, when you break it down like that, it helps us understand like what we're doing. When we look at like what, like say Post, for example, generally across the country is saying is a very broad definition of just using strategies and techniques to decrease the intensity of a conflict or potentially volatile situation. That's so broad. It doesn't tell me what we're supposed to do this thing, but this thing is not specific enough to tell us what to do. So everybody assumes that it's verbal, right? And so when we're looking at force science, I was pretty pleased with that, the four C's, because containment, control, and contact is like if we're containing the scene, we're controlling the terrain. Okay, now let's have a conversation. If those things haven't happened, the communication part doesn't matter right now because it means that we're not in a position to safely conduct dialogue with somebody that isn't willing to do so. And there, furthermore, with their definition, it's a lot better by saying a strategy for resolving conflicts by reducing the intensity of a situation without using force, prioritizing techniques that allow a person to de-escalate themselves while officers assess the risks. And that is can only be done with time, space, and distance. So we have the time to make decisions and to communicate. And I thought that was the best one that I found because it's like, okay, now we can start to implement that into a performance evaluation because that is just like what we talked about yesterday, Rick, with the performance evals from use of force. Um, you approach a scene and you can evaluate how a recruit or an in-service trained cop is initially approaching, initially containing or controlling the scene at a safe time, at a safe distance before even going into the next thing. That can be evaluated, that
Mhm.
can be scored, that can be trained um, to help promote this as a tactic. And to go off the question you had earlier, I would say, like anything else, de-escalation, what obviously I would say is generally um, involves a lot of things, but I think in order for it to make sense, especially to new recruits, they have to have the hard skills in place first. Because if they don't have the tactics and they don't have the skills, then they're just going to walk up to the dude and be like, "Hey, can you calm down?" And then they get punched in the face. So it's like, okay, they need to understand why it's bad to do that through pain and repetition, have some skills and tactics. All right, now here we go. Let's apply this to the precursor. So now they have a plan for when this doesn't work, my next thing is this. Because I think if you do it in the inverse, and that's the first thing that they learn, then when they go to these hands-on scenarios and evaluations, they're going to probably rush to try that because it's imprinted in them
Right.
earlier,
Yes.
and now they're creating bad habits. That's my opinion anyway.
I
Right.
agree 1,000%. Like situations dictate tactics. Let's
Hmm.
teach them how to fight. Let's teach them how to shoot. Let's get at the skill set that they need and then say, okay, cool. Now let's take a step back. Now that you know where you can go and win, and now you understand Graham versus Cotter, where you can, what your crime threat resistance is. Now let's apply that to this. Can we talk to this guy right now? Cool. Then let's talk to him. But as
Hmm.
soon as he makes a different decision, now we can elevate our level of force to what it needs to be rather
Yep.
than saying you only can talk to people.
Hmm.
Right. And that's kind of what I've intuitively put it to. Is I actually believe that all the combatives should be taught at the very beginning. Do the drive, fight, shoot stuff at the very beginning of basic, because there's a lot of people if they can't drive, fight, or shoot, they should. Why waste the other 18 weeks, right?
Hmm.
Also, it's the highest liability, and like in Virginia, there are people who are sworn in with a badge and a gun, driving their cruiser to the academy, who haven't been certified, who haven't been FTO'd, but they have all the tools and implements. This at least gives them some, check the box insurance policy that they've received that training in the first 3 to 5 weeks. But teach them how to drive, fight, shoot, all that stuff at the very beginning, and then teach them how not to use that stuff. That's one of the things. I actually wrote an article for an association talking about scaffolding and interleaving, and
Hmm.
that if we just rearrange how we present stuff in basic, we could improve the quality of people who come out of it. There's a thing. There's a forgetting curve. It's typically first and last things taught are the first things remembered. Now, when I went through academy, and I've heard from a lot of other academies, they do this too. They do all the shoot, fight, drive stuff at the end. So, is it a surprise that when they come out of academy, the first thing they want to do is drive fast, shoot, and fight? But if we teach them all that stuff at the beginning, that's still there. We give them a whole 18 weeks of practice, of scenarios, of adding new things as they go along. So they get all that. Then they get the de-escalation, and now they have tools that they can move to when the de-escalation doesn't work. Well, when the verbals, we should just call it verbal because
Yeah,
like Adam posted, we all agree 1,200 feet per second is de-escalation also.
it
So
sure is.
yeah, verbal de-escalation versus physical or hands-on de-escalation versus less lethal de-escalation versus lethal de-escalation. Um, a while ago when I first posted this, I had Michael South had popped up and said that he had a conversation with a coworker. I've heard this from other people. Where just posting this about this live has generated conversations with other instructors. And he said that one of the things that they were talking about is changing it from use of force and combatives and stuff like that to response to resistance and aggression, which I actually really like
Yeah,
because that puts the onus on who's controlling the scene far more accurately. If they're resisting and they're aggressing, they're the ones that are controlling the direction of our contact, but we get to control the scene. We get to control the environment. So what do y'all think about that? Response to resistance and aggression.
I like it because it encompasses the whole picture. It doesn't encompass just the hard skills. It doesn't encompass just the verbal stuff. It encompasses all of it. And when we expect cops um, to be able to do all of those things the second they're on their own after FTO. So it's I would say almost incumbent upon academies and training to address it like that and deliver it like that. I think that's a really good explanation or a title for that. I can't, when you said that, I was like, oh wow, that really makes sense because it does make it more realistic when we're putting our what we are like I say in DT and stuff with the recruits. It's like we are going to treat the person how their behavior deserves to be treated. And if their behavior is not accepting verbal strategies, I can't continue it anymore. And like our coach says, he says a little bit of force now is better than a lot of force later. So when we try to sell this de-escalation to someone that's not buying it for 15, 20 minutes, all they're doing is formulating a plan and strategy of what to do next because they're not receptive, and we are behind the power curve and we are tactically at a disadvantage. So when we can realize and be able to teach these things in a fluid sense, like you might attempt to de-escalate at time and distance, and then stuff becomes kinetic. You do your kinetic stuff and then it slows down again and you're trying to get him on the ground in cuffs, and now it's like, all right, we got him controlled. Now let's slow back down again and go back to that because we have control, and be like, hey, man, give me your hands. I'm not hitting you. We're in control. Like you can go back, you can modulate between them as long as you have that containment and control to be able to do so. And I think a lot of times recruits or cops will think that the second we're done talking that's either the end of it or the next thing. We can never go backwards, and it has to be like a fluid sliding scale, I think, because that's where I'm seeing a lot of cops get themselves in hairy situations, and more often than not they're just getting lucky. They're not
I
winning,
agree
they're just getting lucky. Yeah.
for sure. I agree with that 100%. And you talk about like the throttle control, being able to pick it up and bring it back down. I think a lot of that comes back to the safety priorities and what's my
Hmm.
priority now, right? If it's a victim and a hostage, I'm willing to take that elevated risk and go. But if I
Yep.
have the containment control and the number one priority on that call right now is the guy standing next to me, the officer standing next to me, I can slow things down a little bit.
Yep.
I can use that force. I don't need to rush back up on this guy after I tase him or whatever. If we put ourselves in a good tactical position, cool. Now I have more control over this suspect. Now let's slow things back down. Hey, dude, let's now talk to this guy. And then if he
Hmm.
wants to escalate again, cool, we can escalate. We can go
That's
back and forth depending on what this is. And too many officers put themselves in a bad situation because they use the force and then they think they have to rush right after that.
hmm
Yeah. Yeah. It's being sucked in, right?
Hmm.
It's getting sucked into the chaos. And it's one of the things I noticed in a lot of the scenarios where I've seen used in training where a scenario goes on, they do something, and the instructor immediately says, "Get on it, get in there." You know,
hmm
it's like I remember a call where a guy I got to the house and the guy was in his house and he was smashing stuff, and I waited outside. I could see him. He was in his living room. There were no weapons anywhere. I didn't see anything else. He was smashing stuff, and one of someone came to back up, and they're like, "How come you're not going in?" I'm like, "He's going to tire himself out. He can smash his own crap. There's nothing illegal about that. He wants to rage. At least he's beating on that stuff and not me." And eventually, he tired out, and he got the rage out, and he had a good conversation, and he ended up not needing to go to jail for anything. So I think that's one of the things that we miss with not having all of these different blocks interleaved is that we miss the opportunity to say, okay, you tased him and now back off and see what he does. Make space. That's one of the things, and I've always been curious about this. I haven't heard a lot about it, but I've heard that EFC actually does this with, it's a blend of Krav Maga and BJJ. Because isn't Krav Maga about burst of violence and back off and make space? Is there a blend for that?
There, there is, and I don't know. I don't necessarily want to turn it into like a martial arts
Right.
debate, but but I think if we look at going back to like goals, right? As a police officer, my goal when I put my hands on somebody is to get them under control, right? And there's a time and place to strike, but what we're seeing a lot of the time is especially when we're attempting control and we start to strike, the issue with that becomes if I'm striking you, that means I have to give up a hand which can apply control to deliver a strike. Now, there may be times where that's appropriate, but I would say, for example, like you have someone on the ground and you're trying to get their hands and you can't. So you start punching them in the face. And we're asking them, show me your hands, give me your hands while I'm punching you. The primal response to that is not to listen to my verbal direction. It is
Hmm.
to protect my face and not get punched, which ends up looking like the fetal position. And then people wonder why they're not giving them their hands. So the whole striking aspect has a part, and then the second reason we don't take that as a primary approach is if I'm striking, I'm not controlling, and then in officer assaults with weapons, we're seeing that more often than not, that hand that the suspect has that we're not controlling is a drag race to the weapon that they have or that we have. It gives them the opportunity to try and retrieve those things instead of us focusing on that control. So I, I've found more success with being able to um, understand when striking is appropriate. And usually that is when we have space and we need to close it, um, or we have control and we're trying to get one limb or one thing done and using it to force that used out of turn, we're applying pain to someone we're trying to get compliant. And the pain response is fetal position, which is tight inside the body, which is the opposite of what we want.
Right.
So, the EFC. I'm familiar with Jay. I've trained with him years ago. I haven't trained with him under the EFC stuff. Um, from what I see, it looks like similar to the majority of the reputable programs out there. I can't speak to the Krav Maga stuff, but I just wanted to hit that striking stuff because I thought that
Yeah.
was important while you were there.
Yeah. I haven't done, I grew up under PPTC
Yep.
and I've had some martial arts and fighting backgrounds and stuff like that, but nothing like what's been going on in the last decade, 15 years. I'm actually a little jealous of you guys nowadays because you have all that available to you. And I wish that stuff was more available. the first time I tried to do an arm bar, tried to use the PPTC, I did an excellent. It was against a 19-year-old iron worker, so dude was ripped, and I did a most excellent job throwing myself to the ground. So he just stood there as I levered myself down. And then I was like, well, this isn't very effective. There's got to be better ways. So that was just a random off the cuff question. But it comes
Yeah,
back
yeah.
to the thing is that the reason I brought that up is that Krav Maga is supposed to be about creating distance. Is there a space for that? But that's a different life, and we need to stay on task.
Yeah, yeah.
But
I think when our goal is to control, right? Our job
yeah,
as cops is apprehension. We need to learn how to control.
Yep.
And creating space comes from, hey, I have to get away and get to another tool and things like that. Other than that, I need to learn how to control this person. And
Hmm.
it's not necessarily striking is the best answer for that. It's how do I control them? How do I control a body? And putting myself in a position to strike from those positions is good
Yeah.
if it's effective and not just like um, someone I can't remember who just put it on there, like striking just out of anger or frustration.
Hmm.
It has to be a purpose behind it. Um, One of the things I was thinking about, and we kind of talked about last night prior to this call, is so how do we teach this? How do we teach the de-escalation the right way? If we're going to teach de-escalation not as a tactic for control, but de-escalation as a a force altogether. And I think Bill,
right.
you were talking about some of the performance objectives that you saw
Yeah.
in some of the previous stuff, and how can we change our performance objectives to make it measurable rather than just hey, recite this or recite that.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, looking at them now, like majority of them are like identify this, discuss this, demonstrate this, and even the demonstration stuff, like demonstrate appropriate response tactics by varying communication styles. Well, response tactics and varying communication styles are two totally different things and don't even belong in the same performance objective. And it comes back to like understanding what this thing is they want us to do. Um, and again, in here, it's like the use of active diffusion strategies in situations of recognized aggression. That can be anything. And so that is so broad. Um, and then we go down to the objectives, and it's talking about all the objectives are referring to like verbal things. So
Mhm.
it's just so convoluted, like no one's made up their mind on what this thing is, and people want to push it anyway. But I think the best way to start is once they have the hard skills in place, is we start to teach them like identifying pre-assault indicators, identifying pre-flight indicators, the whole like clenched fist thing or picking the clothing or grooming cues and stuff like that. So they could recognize like, is this person even receptive enough? Is there a goal in their mind right now to have a conversation, or is it to fight?
Mhm.
And if they can recognize that, and they're like, "Hey, this guy seems like I'm at we have the situation contained. He's by himself with a knife. He's 20 yards away, between two cars in a parking lot with nobody around. Like, yeah, let's slow this down and let's have a talk." But every time, if that's not the case, and he keeps trying to run away from us, and we keep having to try and we're doing things like that's not the time, or there's a dude in a car and we're rushing up to the car. Like the time is not to have that conversation at the window. We need to use our terrain to our advantage, our time and distance to do that. I think that's an easier way to establish some performance objectives. Like you can demonstrate the ability to identify pre-assault indicators by simply calling it out during the scenario. Like the role player will be directed to perform a target glance and a picking gesture at his clothing multiple times, and the recruit could just say, stop picking at your clothing. What do you have anything underneath your shirt? Or why do you keep looking at the door? Do you intend to run? Like you're making me nervous, stuff like that. Then the evaluator can just be like, oh yeah, they recognize those behaviors. And then, okay, the role player stops doing those things and they have time and space. All right, you could start your dialogue and attempt to try and quell this incident. And that's way easier to evaluate and not really that hard to implement, I don't think. as just like a stepping stone and as just as an example.
And I think going right along with that, part of it always comes back to the instructor
Yeah.
and putting on scenarios and not using the same old worn out performance objectives like we've done before. And that's something that I've learned a lot from Rick. I know you have too,
Yeah.
is how do we change our performance objectives to make them measurable for what we're trying to do? So
Hmm.
exactly what you did. In this scenario, I want you to pick at your shirt to see if they recognize that. That's easy to identify, that's easy to train. And then if they do recognize it, okay, then move on to this.
Yeah.
And then structuring our scenarios for our recruits, our in-service, or whoever we're doing it for, in a way to be like, hey, change the situation, keep it similar enough, but then change it just a little bit. So now verbals are going to work, or why are they not going to work? Well,
Hmm.
now, like you said, now I don't have four cars in front of me and 20 and 50 feet. Now they're right up on top of me.
Hmm.
Now I have to raise my level of force depending on what it is. So part of that is also creating those scenarios to show, hey, this is similar, but it's different enough. So verbal talking isn't going to work. I'm gonna have to
Hmm.
de-escalate it a different way.
So one of the things I've been thinking about how I would structure this, and one of the things Bill said earlier, and you've hit on a couple times also that we haven't really quite mentioned, is that we have this spectrum is the term I'm using now, the spectrum of use of force, or now I'm going to start calling the spectrum of de-escalation, or the spectrum of response to resistance and aggression. We teach how to handle. We start out with the worst stuff, the fighting, the less lethal, the guns. Then we go to now. This is how you can talk to people before it gets to that point. But then we also need to include in that threat identification.
Hmm.
Is that how often do we have threat awareness is part of a block somewhere else, and then they just expect it to miraculously pop up 6 weeks later. Well, why didn't you do that? You had that 4 hour block on threat identification. None of it was inculcated. None of it was cemented in the brains of the trainees because they got a 4 hour block, took a test, and moved on. So one of the things that we need to do is structure the courses so that there's interleaving.
Yes.
Hmm.
Teach them, talk about the legality of use of force. So that's essential. Then we do then we do a graduated. Here are the laws pertaining to use of force, Fourth Amendment, Eighth Amendment, such like that. U.S. Code 1987, I think it is. And then you have now we're going to talk about the 9 ways that you can control a situation. What's the term for that, Jamie? I keep forgetting it. Don't y'all have a specific term for that combatives control that you
Oh
do
yeah.
that has nine
Yeah. Intercept, like three ways to entry, stabilize, three ways to control the body, and then resolve, three
yeah,
ways to resolve it. So just kind of keep it simple. But
Phenomenal.
yeah, we need a
Mhm.
catchy term
That's
for it.
awesome.
The 9 ways or something like that. So you teach them the 9 ways, and then you teach them the left lethal. And as you're doing that, you have scenarios where do you recognize that there's an opportunity for use of force, the legal side of it? And then they get it, they either grapple or whatever they have to do. Then they get into the grappling is not working. What do you do next? Then, here's the legalese about using lethal, using less lethal, if you have. But then you have scenarios where they go immediately from, hey, how you doing? Good charges, and then they have to pull up. So then we get into, do you do the threat identification before you do the combatives after the legals? And then after all that's done, then you do the de-escalate the verbal controls. I'm going to kind of start calling it verbal control. So it would be legalese of use of force, threat identification, the 9 ways, the uh, less lethal than lethal, then verbal de-escalation, verbal control, and and as you go along, you start building every scenario. And you can't just have one. You have to have multiple scenarios where nothing happens. You have to have scenarios where everything happens, and then scenarios where, depending on how you pick your, what is that? The old books, the pick your adventure,
Hmm.
where if you do it right, then things go well. If you do it wrong, then things don't go well. But also, if you do things right, things still go sideways
Yep.
because I honestly believe when it all boils down to, we would improve the resiliency of our personnel if they learned in class in a sterile, safe place to fail that they could do everything right and things still go sideways.
Yes.
I think you see a lot of cops dropping out when I thought I de-escalated him. I had to shoot him. That that's what happens
Hmm.
sometimes, you know. So I think that we could fix resiliency if we structured it that way. What do y'all think about that plan? Or did I talk too much and I lost it?
Yeah, I
No, I
think it's
think you
good. I think.
nailed it.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Bill.
No, I was just saying, I think you nailed it. I think that's the the way that I would say that that order is fine.
I think too often the police academies and departments in general, the firearms guys aren't talking to the DT guys. The DT guys
Hmm.
aren't
Oh
talking to
yeah,
the tactics guys,
absolutely.
right? And so everybody's on a different page, and everybody's okay. We're going to teach this here. We're going to teach this here. One thing that we found success with in our academy right now is the firearms guys and the DT guys. We're all on the same page. So
It's huge.
when they're working on weapon manipulation, we're doing the same thing in DT. So we all kind
Hmm.
of do it together to show, okay, it works on the range, it works here. So then you can apply all of that when you're doing your use of force scenarios, your use of de-escalation scenarios, because they've practiced it all at different places and everybody's on the same page teaching the same thing.
I think there's a term for that. It's called instructional design.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. There's a book. There's a really good book out there.
Oh, really? I hadn't
Yeah.
heard.
Uh-huh.
Thank you for the plug. Creating training for law enforcement brought to you by Rick Jacobs and Letnick.
There you go.
So,
Not, and I think going back like in to what I just said a little bit ago, that's one of the good things that I've learned from you, Rick, is how to design those courses. You could have a great course, you could have a great you can the design could be great, but your documentation isn't right. So how can you document it to where you have the performance objectives that match what you want to teach? That way,
yep,
when me as an instructor, I'm teaching one thing, I can give the same thing to Bill, and he knows exactly what to look for in those because we have so many instructors coming in and out. And that's one of the bigger problems with law enforcement, too, is you have an instructor at the academy for 1, 2, 3 years, and then they bounce.
yep.
How do we continue that same structure and have everybody on the same page as we do it?
I would say it's through documentation and building a
Hmm.
doctrine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I won't mention his name is somebody that we've just recently all got I put you all in contact with. One of the problems that he has is that they actually have an instructional design team that has no interaction with the instructors. So they're building training without actually knowing what the instructors' needs are and what they're doing. So you need what we need to have in every training unit, and you've heard me talk about this before, that a training unit should be a specialty unit, just like SWAT, just like K9, require SOPs, methodologies, documented processes, evaluation systems, stuff like that. But in academies, we need a systems thinker, not
Hmm.
just an instructional designer, but somebody who looks at all the system of training and knows how to interleave, build, and scaffold and all that stuff. So you can have your firearms instructors only, dragging their knuckles in the dirt shooting guns. You can have your BJJ instructors dragging their knuckles on the mats, fighting, wrestling, and carrying on. Then you can have your chatty nerds who can drag their knuckles and only talk about verbal de-escalation. But you need to have that one person that can look at the whole system and combine those things in a way that makes sense, that reinforces everybody's work, but in cooperation with the firearms instructor, with the BJJ guy, with the verbal de-escalation, all that stuff. You need to have that cohesion of a team instead of a
Hmm.
whole bunch of individuals all under the umbrella of an agency or academy name.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was having this conversation with my buddy the other day. We did a firearms instructor course a couple weeks ago, and one of the things that always drove me nuts, and still does, is when you're teaching a new subject. Well, I'll refer to these folks as like the legacy, like the legacy red shirts, like the guys that'll just stand behind you and say like, "Hey, you're anticipating. Stop doing that." And it's like, what does that mean? Like,
Yeah.
in their head, they're just regurgitating what they were taught. And so
Slow trigger
they don't.
press.
That's it. They just say the same stuff with no context to it.
Mhm.
And it bothers me when we're trying to teach someone a new skill who doesn't have that skill, and we are interleaving things too soon. Like for example, we're shooting on the range to understand how to shoot, and you hear guys talking about you're not going to do that in combat. You need to do your scan, and or you need to not pick up stuff off the ground. It's like we're not there yet. They need a base skill before we could start interleaving things, and they haven't learned tactics yet, and that's the whole point. Like I think a lot of instructors will try to interleave things at the wrong time when they don't have the base framework to even understand. So you got a person who's never shot a gun before and they're shooting on the range, and you're telling them the thing that you're yelling at them over is you didn't scan and you picked up a magazine off the deck, and that could get you killed in combat. And it's like, how does that have any relevance to what I'm learning right now? Now their focus is, okay, make sure I do my scan and don't pick up my mags so that I don't get yelled at, as opposed
Mhm.
to like, your grip is shit. Why don't we work on that first? And then once we got this thing dialed, yeah, we could start running some drills with simunitions, and we could start talking tactics and start interleaving the skills that we know. But we can't interleave things that we don't know yet, because then we're going to just be information overload. And I think yeah, and I think a lot of times that they try to throw the word around and do it, and it's just at the wrong time. And I think it comes back to Rick, what you said was like most just don't know what they don't know. Because before I met you, the only place that I ever learned how to teach, like the skill of teaching, was through Darcy down in Arkansas, and through jujitsu. Like the methods of instructing course for law enforcement was a joke. It's like, here's how you make a PowerPoint, and the
Mhm.
rest of the 40 hours was like, look at what I used to do back in the day. And it had no relevance as far as how to teach. But working with you, understanding a lot of this, and then through jujitsu and through Darcy, was like those places like were an asset in as far as like teaching people how to teach. And it's such a lost art in our world. And I don't, I think people can benefit, not to pitch your book again, but people could really benefit from like reading that and consulting you on stuff.
I
And I
appreciate
think it's incumbent on an instructor. Like if you take that role on, if you go to an academy or you become an instructor, whatever, it's incumbent on you to learn how to be an instructor. Just
Yep.
because you can do it doesn't mean you're a good teacher at it. Like
Mhm.
when I decided to leave the team and go out to training, like I wanted to focus on how I could be the best instructor. How can I teach people? How can I communicate well? What questions do I ask? And if you're an instructor at academy, you should be doing the same thing,
Mhm.
seeking out info from people like Rick to learn how to design courses. And it's an art in itself. And if you want to call yourself an instructor, you have to study it to be good at it.
Yeah, and there's so many people that they get that instructor cert, and I've reached the top.
Yep.
Like
Hmm.
when I got my first instructor cert, I was thinking, holy crap, I've just reached the bottom of the mountain. There's a
Hmm.
lot of climbing involved. And that's one of the things that Bill and I talked about also, is that when I got my first firearms instructor cert, it was in 1994. It was NRA, and after that class, I was like, I know there's a lot that I don't know. So I've taken like 5 or 6 firearms instructors courses over the last 30 years. And the only reason I don't take them consistently now is because I just don't have the money or the time to go into them. But if I had a bank account that made me happy, I'd be going to every firearms instructor course I could, because even if it's a bad course, I'm learning something. I'm either
Hmm.
validating what I'm doing right, or I'm learning how not to do it that way, or I'm learning, holy crap, that's a great idea. Like even last night, Bill and I were talking about the test that he rewrote for use of force, and he had an idea that's not in the book that will be in addition to. I'm going to steal it from him. I'll give him credit, of course, but it was a really good way of how he's just doing his answer keys. And I've always I've always coded my performance objectives and put the performance objective with the question. But he even went so far as to in his answer key, this is why this is the answer that is supposed to be. This is why it's supposed to be this way. Here's the and here's all the objectives that that answer covers. I thought that was brilliant. It's great, and it's guys like you, Jamie, and you, Bill, who are going to continue pushing it and keep developing these kind of things and asking these questions. The whole purpose of this live came from a question:
Mhm.
why is de-escalation being trained the way it is? Why is de-escalation in a box off to the side, filling a hole in a schedule? So what would you say? What do you think the first steps would be for anybody who wants to implement this change? You both work at academies. I don't know if you can say what academies they are. I think Jamie, you don't care because everybody knows where
No.
you work.
Mhm.
But even for agency guys who aren't in academies, where would you start? What would you look at?
As far as how to start implementing this stuff,
Yeah, how would you go? How would you go about saying, okay, we need a systems design approach to how we're doing use of force and combatives training.
not to plug you again, but reach out to people like you, like Rick. Reach out to people like you because you understand how to do that. And I think one of the discussions that you and I had when you came to my course is I know how to be a cop. I don't know how to document all this stuff like an instructor, like a course should be. And I can teach and I understand the material, but in order to get to where we can document all this stuff down the road so that I can pass it off to another instructor and it becomes a system, you have to have that back end documentation stuff, which we as cops don't think of and don't understand how to do.
Mhm.
And in order for it to continue to progress in the academy, because we all know how it goes, a new instructor comes in, he's going to change everything. He's
And I
going to
would
do it his old
say,
way.
yeah, and I would say, you do know how to do it. We just don't put it together. It's
Yes.
one of the things that one of our first conversations I was telling Bill, I can't remember what the topic was. I said, actually, you already know how to do it. You're doing it this way in this situation. He was like, holy crap, you're absolutely right. We do know how to document things because all of us have had to take reports.
Hmm.
We've all had to build cases. We've all had to testify in court on our evidence. And that's all the process is documenting and creating your evidence for your course. So it's we know how to do it, we just don't know how to apply it. But where to start? And that's usually the biggest problem. So if we have this problem of how are we going to revamp this, I think my first thing would be is to ride along with dudes on the street and see what they're doing. Go through body worn camera, see if your agency allows you to review body worn camera and ask for not just the situations where things went wrong, but ask for who do you think does a really good job of de-escalating that you've seen, who do you think struggles, and where's some stuff that's gone bad, and then just start doing an analysis and document everything that they did. Oh, they missed this threat indicator. They called him a son of a bitch, and they didn't need to. They started yelling at somebody who was just confused and didn't need to be yelled at. There's this video going around right now where the guy was at somebody's house, and this dude without a shirt comes up and is just
Oh
talking
man.
crap, and the dude without the shirt ends up getting executed. That might be the bad word to use, executed, but
Hmm.
that's what it felt like when I watched this. Like that guy did not deserve to die.
Yeah,
There's a
that was
whole lot
rough.
of mistakes, whole lot of
Yeah.
mistakes made.
I,
Yeah.
as
Go
far as
ahead.
where to start that training, I think the first question has got to be like, who's your audience? Because I think it would be vastly different for a recruit than it would be for someone who's been on the road for
Yeah,
a while. And I think it's easier to do the recruit because you got a blank canvas, so you know what you have, um, and you can build that how you want. So I think the folks at the academy, generally, even if you can't change that 4 hour de-escalation block that they get, that's easy enough to add to the use of force product and the DT product that exists because it's involved in there for the academy. But when you're talking about like in service and guys on the road, now, like you said, Rick, like doing those ride-alongs and seeing what people know and what they can apply already is going to be really important as far as what we uh, like craft this syllabus to address. So, because if you do that ride along and you like, wow, this guy's a really good talker, but he's out of shape and he can't handle himself when we go hands on, then maybe the first step is, well, we got to get these hands on skills down, and now that can work in the background like our operating system and frees up our brain to be able to make these tactical decisions and these de-escalation conversations be worthwhile, because they know that if this doesn't work, I have this as an option. And I think now that de-escalation has been in the forefront, what we're seeing is like, oh, de-escalation is the tool. And then if I'm deficient at hands-on, that's when we see like tasers coming out like that guy did. And we're out of shape. So we're pulling out guns and tools when they don't need to, because we are either A, insecure in our abilities, or B, we know that we don't want to get tired. So we're going to use the most force that we can to try and stop this scenario from evolving, instead of being able to slow it down. And if we don't have the tools to be able to slow it down, then I think we have to address that first, including like the tactics, like Jamie had mentioned. I think, without that, your ability to de-escalate is almost non-existent.
Right.
Yeah, and I think right along with what you just said is helping officers understand what the use of force actually is, where they can go and win, understanding Graham versus Connor, understanding
Hmm.
case law, because a lot of times, and I see it all the time, officers use less force than they can at that time,
Yeah.
and then they rely on a tool,
Hmm.
or they because they don't have the it goes back, they don't have the skill set, they don't understand where they can escalate to. Escalation is a form of de-escalation, right? You can
Yeah.
escalate when you need to. So I think that should be part of the curriculum too, is
Yeah.
understanding that case law, your use of force, where you can go and win, because people don't go to where they should often enough.
That's one of the things that Bill has added to his use of force class is more, instead of just being a 4 hour block of here's all the laws, here's all the way you can screw up and leave it at that. He's adding scenarios where people will act out things that may or may not violate case law, and the rest of the class evaluate it and against a rubric, and then they have a conversation, and then they decide did that person violate or not. They're essentially doing in class what people would be doing in court. So there's ways of implementing this. Tabavi Margate, decision making has to be a part of training. Implementing these just little things into a class where you're training people on decision making, which is what it all boils down to. If this person isn't complying to what I'm saying, I have a decision to make. If
Hmm.
this person is holding a knife and not listening to me, I have a decision to make. If this person is starting to blade up and starting to hike his shorts up, I have a decision to make. But we're not training those key points of what is the decision you're going to make now that you see this. And that needs to be included in our training as well.
Agreed.
Yeah. 100%. 100%.
But we've gone for a full hour. Do y'all have any more you want to say? We could probably talk another 3 hours and get down to two people watching, but
I could talk all
I
day, man. So don't ask me.
and y'all know that I can talk way more than I need to.
Yeah.
yeah, I think we covered a lot of stuff. I think we covered, I mean, all the stuff we wanted to talk about. And I think the thing to always remember, and um, I had a conversation with somebody when I was talking about having this live tonight, is how often leadership forgets what de-escalation really should be,
Yeah.
right? And they think that it's only one way, and we need to help people understand escalation is de-escalation. There's
Yeah,
lots of
that
different
was
ways to
Yeah.
escalate and de-escalate, and leadership forgets that because they're not back on the street. And I think it goes back to what you guys said earlier. Go on a ride along, see what's actually going on over there. And if true leaders would do that, they would understand that, hey, verbal judo isn't always the best thing. And like I think it was Johnny said, yeah, verbal judo only works when you have judo. Like you have
Yeah.
to be able to use both and be
yeah.
willing to use both when you need it.
There's actually that's one of the comments from Tuna Nut 7. Biggest issue we see now is the untrained leaders believing using force isn't a de-escalation method, which leads to officers hesitating, therefore poor outcomes. So yeah, exactly. That's a good way of ending off. Maybe part of our job is to educate and lead up the chain just as much as it
Hmm.
is to lead out to our personnel and our recruits.
Agreed.
That's a really good point, and I know tuna nut pretty well, and what we're seeing now, especially with the all the new, and I'm DT biased, so forgive me, but um, what we're seeing now is with all these new emerging DT programs like the one Jamie's running, which I think is phenomenal, what we're doing, which I think is
Mhm.
very good. The leadership that makes the calls has not experienced that. So they're making decisions and policy based off of what they know from 15, 20 years ago. And oftentimes what we see is like, you hear somebody say, "Oh, I did 20 years at this department." And you break it down and it's like, well, you spent 5 years on the road, then you became a boss. And when you were the boss, you stayed inside and you hid in your car and let patrol handle it. And then you got promoted to lieutenant and you're behind a desk. So your hands-on experience over 20 years was probably 5 years on the road 20 years ago. And
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 what did
that
you do while
pers
you were on the road? If you're
exactly
sitting in
like
a parking lot, or you're
because
actually getting into shit.
100%, and that perspective is gone. And now they're making policy based off of their experience back then with the tools and equipment they used instead of
Hmm.
being like consulting the guys like you, Jamie. He's like, "Hey, we need this active shooter stuff. What are we seeing? What are we doing?" Instead of implementing policies that are so irrelevant and outdated. And the leadership is a huge aspect of it. I think you can lead up. I think that's definitely possible. But again, just like de-escalation, like if they're not willing to have the conversation, that's the first part. Is like if you're not willing to hear us out, then we're gonna come to like a standoff. But the benefit is that we have the direct control over what is taught at the end of the day. And so what I learned from Rick, again, plug, was, I can't, where I work, I can't change my goals and objectives that I'm mandated to teach, but there's nothing saying I can't add any. And
Hmm.
when I add them and I cover what I need to, in the same amount of time, now I can evaluate people based off of like what we're seeing. And until those folks want to have that conversation and actually listen and change the things that are required, that's what I'll do to kind of bridge that gap. And at some point, and I think Phoenix had done it. I don't know if it was you or Ryan that I was talking to. They did such a good job that post AZ Post was like, "Hey, let's change this." And I think that might have been
Hmm.
for firearms. Um, but yeah, I think that's the best way is like, if they want to have the conversation, hey, good, let's do it. But if not, we got to focus on what's in our control and deliver what we can, and even if that includes, adding more work, which typically is what we're experiencing. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's a really good point.
And most of the people who resist the growth and the change are the people who don't want to do the work that growth and change comes with. And I'd
Hmm.
even go so far as the guy with the boss with 5 years of road experience. He's not basing policy on his 5 years of experience. He's basing his policy on the fantasy of what he thought his 5 years experience was.
Hmm.
Because most likely, you know, not everybody's running and gunning constantly. I saw Apex training. Apex had posted one time before the 5 years experience in a hot zone is more than 20 years of experience in a small town kind of a thing.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
it's true. That's why I talked about you got to bring receipts, not just a resume. It's like if you say you're on SWAT, Jamie was on SWAT 16 years and what, like 300 to 400 call outs a year.
Hmm.
I know guys who've been on a SWAT team that had like 12, if that, call outs a year.
Yep.
So it's not equal. It's not equal just being on a SWAT team.
No, it's not.
So yeah, so we started going down a rabbit hole again. Like
Hmm.
I'd hate to sit at a Texas Roadhouse and have a conversation. We'd be closing the joint. The waitress would be pissed because she'd still get the same tip.
Yeah.
But
I
appreciate
gotta
y'all
get to my
coming on.
kid's football game anyway, so
What's
Yeah.
that?
yeah, my kid's got a football game tonight, so we gotta head to that here in a little bit.
Oh
So I
yeah,
gotta head back
Nice.
and
absolutely,
so.
awesome,
Yeah, I'm sure we could do this again, and this was good.
Hmm. For
definitely.
Yeah.
sure.
Well, I appreciate you guys coming on, And anybody have any questions who have paid attention to this live, feel free to DM all three of us. Make sure you follow all three of us if you want more information. We're constantly putting out content for free. And because we're all about improving the state of law enforcement training, not just improving our pocketbooks or our egos. So we're
Mhm.
happy to share, happy to talk, and we're grateful for everybody who participated tonight. Thank you very
Yep.
much.
Yeah, thank you
Boys, talk to you
guys.
later.
All
All
right,
right, man.
Mike.
Later.